The 5 most common mistakes preachers make, number 3. The third most common mistake that preachers make is too much bad news in the sermon. I've experienced it several times, both as preaching the sermon and also listening to sermons, where a person will get up and they will give you all kind of statistics about what's wrong. And they spend a large amount of time in the sermon quoting statistics. For example, more African American men are in jail than are in college. And then they'll quote statistics upon more bad news and more bad news and more bad news. I tend to think that we're better at the bad news than we are at the good news. This is a flaw in the preaching process from someone who really wants to be an excellent preacher, because people know the bad news. They don't have all the statistics. They may not have all of the information, but they have a sense. And so what they're looking for are creative gospel solutions to the problems of life. And if you spend an inordinate amount of time in the bad news and you're better at describing the bad news than you are the good news, if you're not careful, the majority of the sermon, let's say the first 2/3 of the sermon, is bad news, and then you don't want to send people home with a downer, so you try to spend the last third of the sermon trying to pick people up. And so it's really out of balance. And so my mentor, Henry Mitchell, and I, we argue back and forth, but this is what I agree with him. He used to always say that the sermon should be no more than 30% bad news, and it ought to be early. The later you are in the preaching time, the sermonic discourse, the more good news that you should be sharing. What people are looking for are gospel solutions. I tell you this story. I was teaching a class down, and I was talking about this subject, and a person about good news, and a person raised their hand and said, Pastor Thomas, it sounds like that, you're soft on sin. It sounds like that, when I preach, I like people to feel the flames and their garments to be singed by the fires of hell. I want people to feel the heat of hell when I preach. I just, and I said, what if we could describe heaven with the same sense of descriptiveness that we describe hell? In other words, would that we could describe the gentle breeze that is blowing, of the gentle breeze of grace that's blowing over the balcony of heaven into people's lives, as we could the fires of hell and damnation. We're better at fire and brimstone than we are at grace and mercy. I'm challenging you. A common mistake is to be better at bad news than we are at good news, at fire and brimstone, hell and damnation, than we are at grace and mercy. Describe grace and mercy. Let people feel the gentle breeze blowing over the balcony of heaven of God's grace, and people will come to hear you and will listen to you and receive your words.